To ask questions, please use the Q&A feature found in the black toolbar. You can adjust your volume to your own preferred setting. The quality of the audio will be based on everyone's individual bandwidth. If you would like closed captioning, click on the captioning function on the black toolbar and also on the bottom. After this webinar is over, you will receive the recording link, the slides, and all mentioned resources within the next 72 hours. Lastly, I want to encourage you all to sorry. I want to encourage you all to tweet and share what you're learning by using hashtag #SchoolEveryday. Once again, thank you for joining today's webinar. Teams make all the difference for improving attendance. I'm going to hand things over to Kwesi Rollins, Chief Program Officer at the Institute for Educational Leadership and Chair and Advisory Board for Attendance Works.
Thanks, Jaden, and welcome everyone to our first webinar in the series. I'm Kwesi Rollins at the Institute for Educational Leadership, and you'll hear shortly from one of my many partners in crimes, Hetty Chang, who's our Executive Director of Attendance Works. We're really, as always, quite excited to get this off the ground, this first in the series. You can go to the next slide. Encourage everybody to please share your name and your agency and where you're from in the chat. And as Jaden said, we'll take Q&A, we'll take questions and answers in the Q&A section. So the chat is really to just introduce yourselves. IEL is a 60-plus-year-old organization, home of the Coalition for Community Schools, a district leaders network on family and community engagement, and a range of other things. We are essentially a national intermediary that works with schools and districts and states and all kinds of configurations and networks to really change conditions, to transform conditions, and to improve the outcomes for children, youth, and families. You can go to the next slide. And Attendance Works, of course, you're all familiar with, is really the nation's leading voice on this issue of chronic absenteeism. Attendance Works exists to advance better policy and to nurture proven and promising practices and to promote meaningful and effective communications. And we'll hear more about that work as we go through the day. Next slide. So here's our agenda. This is the first in the series of our attendance awareness campaign. I'm going to talk just a little bit of an overview of our key concepts of the campaign. You'll hear a video shortly that I'll introduce. And then we have a dynamic panel for today's topic, Teams Make All the Difference. We'll hear from Jeremy Acree, Euclid City Schools outside of the Cleveland First Ring, Cami Cohen, principal of an elementary school in Tennessee, and William Jackson Riley, who's principal of a middle school in Rhode Island. And then we'll have our closing reflections and share resources. You can go to the next slide. Thanks again to all of our convening partners for this year's campaign for Great Level Reading, Communities in Schools, Healthy Schools Campaign, Future Ed, Everyone Graduates, Learning Heroes, Mentor, National League of Cities, United Way. And there's a full list of campaign partners can be found on the Attendance Works website. You can go to the next slide, Jaden. So this is the first in the series. We're very excited. We have, over 3,000 people registered, and already we have over 1,000 who've come live. So that's very exciting. And it lets us know and confirms that this is a critical issue and you want to learn more about how teams make all the difference. Webinar number 2 is on health, well-being, and safety. Webinar 3, student connectedness and how it fosters attendance and engagement. And our final in the series in September will be family engagement as the foundation for attendance and learning. Next slide, Jaden. Special thanks to campaign sponsors, Kaiser Permanente, School Technology, and Raw Week 12 Attendance Plus. Next slide. And so, of course, all of this work is possible through, grants, contracts, and donations from folks like yourself. Please donate today. It is totally acceptable to support the things that are important to you and yours, and you can point your camera toward the QR code for a shortcut to donating today. You can also find a donate button on the Attendance Works website. This work is only possible through a combination of all kinds of funding. Next. And so our slogan today, which we're going to build on: here today, ready for tomorrow. Next. And I see some folks have raised hands. We're not really doing questions in that way. So if you have a question already before we've even started, go ahead and put it in the Q&A and we'll get to it as best we can. Here today, ready for tomorrow, highlights the role that schools play in promoting student well-being and achievement. And really, as the title suggests, you've got to be present in order to grow and to continue to learn. And so we're going to hear a lot today about how teamwork, working together, deeper collaboration sets the stage for kids being ready tomorrow. Next slide. And so next, and don't start the video yet. Next, we have an important message from one of the organizations that is a supporter and a partner. We'll hear from Ray Saldano, the CEO of Communities in Schools, which is a founding member of the Coalition for Community Schools, and the nation's largest implementer of the integrated student supports model. Ray will talk about research that Harvard conducted using data from states, the census, as well as information collected by communities in schools, which explored the impact of providing intensive wraparound services. This research confirms what we know from common sense and experience, that being here today makes you ready for tomorrow. This new research makes that crystal clear. Let's hear from Ray about what that research shows. And you can show the
A
video.
little bit of context for those of folks who are not as familiar with Communities in Schools. We have a model we call integrated student supports, and we believe it can inform your work and the efforts in the field. But what we do is we take a rigorous and evidence-based approach to wraparound services. Our model places a trained, caring adult inside schools to coordinate those wraparound supports. Now, think everything from food, clothing, mental health supports, tutoring, and transportation. These supports, in our opinion, are not extras or nice to haves, but they're essentials. They're what helps students be present, prepared, and connected. So let's get to the results. What they found in their analysis was clear. Students in high poverty schools with CIS were more likely to graduate, more likely to be employed, and by age 30, they were earning $1,500 more per year than their peers in similar schools without CIS. That's not just a bump in income, it's a meaningful shift if you span it over the lifetime of that student. And according to the study, over time, that kind of impact, if scaled nationwide, can help close the earning gap between students in high and low poverty schools by an estimated 20%. 20% because of the difference. Now, what was driving that difference? This is not just a story of Communities in Schools, but what the intervention and the data reveals is that, you guessed it, it was an improvement in attendance that our work was driving. The simple but powerful act of showing up. What the Harvard study found was that even a half-day reduction in attendance, or said another way, 46 more days attended per year per 100 students, that is leading to higher test scores, increased graduation rates, and stronger long-term earnings for students in those schools that they compared. In fact, the reduction in absenteeism, to take an example, in CIS elementary schools accounted for 45% of the gains in math proficiency scores across those comparison schools. The simple translation is this: when kids attend school more, they perform better academically and have a greater chance at future similar to their more advantaged peers. And we can now see that with data over time because of the driving force of attendance. And when more students attend consistently, everyone benefits. Even those who never miss a day. The classroom runs better, teachers can teach, students can learn together, the learning environment becomes more stable, more connected, and more effective. So yes, attendance matters.
Thanks for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hetty, and we'll share just briefly. You'll be able to see the survey results, and then we can take those down. Hetty?
All right. Well, thank you, Kwesi, and thank you, Ray, even though he's only showing up by video. What I'm so excited about, Kwesi, is that research on CIS shows what we have long been saying. Gotta show up today to be ready for tomorrow. And what's so exciting about today's panel is they are going to help us all see what's possible. How can you make sure kids are here today so they're ready for tomorrow? But with that said, we know that we've got folks coming in from lots of different places. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to just do some grounding to make sure that we're all on the same page. What we're going to talk about today a lot is how do you improve attendance and how do you reduce chronic absence, which is now a widely accepted metric. 10 years ago, no one knew what it was, but it's missing 10% of more school for any reason, excused or unexcused, or suspensions. It's really talking about those benefits that Ray was talking about. It's the notion that we have to shift from trying to think about that we're going to scold and blame kids and punish kids into showing up to school, to showing, and this is what we have research showing, is that when you take preventive, problem-solving, trauma-sensitive approaches that engage kids and families, then we can get kids back to school. Now, we can use average daily attendance to notice things like, oh, half days don't work so well. Maybe we want to address that. And or you might notice that bad weather, we're not equipping kids. So you can use attendance data, but what you really want to do is look at chronic absence, because when kids miss too much school for any reason, it affects their performance as well as others. And you go to the next slide, I will say, what we're seeing nationwide is that chronic absence nearly doubled during the pandemic. It is starting to come down. We think in 2024, which was last school year, it went down further, maybe another couple percentage points based on state data. 2025 data is still not yet available. So that's good news, it's coming down, but it's not coming down everywhere. Some places are still seeing some increases. It makes a difference what you do. And I want to show the next slide and point out, with the next slide, please, that it makes a difference, not just, again, for the kids who are chronically absent, but for every kid in that classroom and school, because the ripple effects are huge when kids miss school. So it's in all our interests to make this happen. Next slide. We also know, based on experience and research, that the key to reducing chronic absence is building relationships and addressing what causes students to miss too much school. And those two things are connected, because unless you build a relationship, a kid and family is unlikely to tell you what's happening so that you can help address whatever it is, whether it's the fact that they're facing barriers in their community, don't have access to transportation or healthcare, or the fact that they're experiencing bullying or anxiety, or that they're feeling disengaged because there's been a lot of churn, or they're not having opportunities to connect with other peers, or is it misconceptions? And actually, the other key to relationships is because, let's say you are trying to overcome a misconception. Kids don't realize, just missing 2 days actually is affecting me. It's affecting me socially, emotionally, academically. But if you're in relationship, when teachers are in relationship to kids, they can help kids see how showing up to school every day matters. And if they're not in relationship, kids may not think that much of the person trying to reach out to them and convince them that should be in school. We also know, though, that there are things like, one of the challenges we faced in the pandemic is a lot of folks are still confused about, I have a sniffle, I have a mild stomach ache, should I show up back to school? When we know things have changed, but again, relationships matter, because when people trust the messenger, they trust the message. Next slide. So what we've seen is that when you have high levels of chronic absence, it's really an erosion in positive conditions for learning. We know kids show up to school when they feel physically, emotionally healthy and safe in school, when they feel a sense of belonging, connection, support, when they feel academic challenge and engagement, when they and the staff experience well-being, and this is, again, all contingent upon relationship. But when you see high levels, as we are still seeing, we're not even back down to near we were pre-pandemic, and it's been 3 years, 4 years since school closed. And that's because rebuilding these positive conditions of learning takes intentionality, investment, patience, perseverance. Next slide. It takes making sure they're at the foundation of a tiered approach. Because if you, tier one messaging, for example, that's attendance related can be like, oh, Jackson, I missed you. I want you here. But if you don't feel like school is a place that you belong and are connected, or you don't feel safe in school, someone sending you that message won't work. So you have to put in those foundational supports, and that's for the whole school to do. You have to have attendance supports that help make sure kids know when they should show up, make sure that they're missed. Tier two, that is targeted at kids who are missing more, and then more intensive interventions. And all of these are predicated on each other, because if you don't do the earlier prevention related aspects, you end up overwhelmed at tier three and you don't have the resources to combat it. Next slide. This is about taking a systemic approach that is actionable data, followed up with positive engagement, strategic partnerships, because this is not something that schools alone can do, adequate resources, because some places with higher levels of poverty, higher levels of absenteeism, they actually require more. Shared responsibility among everyone in a school community, and then building a capacity of everyone to work together to use their data to do this. Next slide. So this is not a solo endeavor. You can't put in a systemic approach by one person. Just not possible, no matter how fabulous that one person is. And you need both district teams and school teams. You need district teams who can help think about a systemic district-wide approach, who can make sure that they're routinely unpacking and providing data, because if you meant it that every principal had to do it for themselves, only the really most motivated principals are going to do it, and even then they'll get tired. We got to equip site leaders to take effective approaches and involve a team. We got to promote shared accountability and continuous improvement. But then the rubber hits the road at the school level. You have a team who can support a whole school approach, who can make sure that the strategies address the root causes that they see, who make sure that the particular kids who need more supports get them. Next slide. So you'll really need to think that attendance, so often we've siloed attendance. Just these people in student support services have to do with this. When what we need to do is make sure that we have teams of folks who involve across departments, because across departments, you have the folks who affect whether kids feel engaged, have access to health services, have access to the mental health, different kinds of sports, the transportation, all the issues that affect whether kids show up to school. And it's when we work across departmentally that we can get those systemic improvements and sustained improvements. Next slide. We also need school teams that are led by the school principal, because you need a systemic approach where sometimes they can have a person who's supported by the principal, but in the back, I've always still seen the school principal, even if they're not there at every meeting, they're equipping the person and making sure that that team runs well. And again, lots of folks, including some of the other folks like sports coaches, expanded learning, community schools, different folks who can bring their resources to bear. Sometimes this is a new team, but many times it's an existing team. Or you have take functions and you have an MTSS team looking at the school-wide approach, but then you have an intervention team that's looking at academics, behavior, and attendance together. And that's part of the role of the principal in thinking about who are the teams that need to support this. Next slide. So we got to mobilize the whole school community to be involved, engaging students and families, all school staff, engaging external partners. Next slide. This is about using your data to think about where you need relationships and then thinking about structure. And you'll hear from our panelists how these things work together in a sustained approach. Next slide. And just want to make sure that folks know we've got other resources. These are free on our website, that if you want more support, you can get them here. Okay, now for the really amazing part of this webinar. Not listening to me, but listening to our panelists. So we're joined by Jeremy, Kami, and Jackson Riley. So and one of the things that's wonderful about all of these folks is they represent different parts of the country, different kinds of communities, and they show this is possible. We're going to start with Kami, we're going to start with the youngest kids first. So she's our elementary school principal with Compass Beclaire, which is a charter school in Memphis, Tennessee. Welcome, Kami.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go to the next slide. So, Kami, tell us a little bit. These are the questions we're going to be asking you about how you've been in your position, why you tackled it. Then we're going to ask you about who's on your team, how's the team function, and then what have been your most effective strategies. Let's start with the first question. So, next slide. Because gives a little information. So, folks, I'm just going to have you think a little. So, actually, you know what? Let's just start without a slide for a second. Folks can see a little bit about your background, but Kami, tell us, how long you've been a principal and why did you tackle this issue of attendance?
So I've been at Compass Claire. This is my 5th year, and I am in my 3rd year as principal. My amazing team, some of them are on this call actually, is my school counselor, the dean of academics, and our school secretary. So we meet every Friday, most Fridays, unless something happens and we have to reschedule at 8:30. And we dive in every other Friday.
Before you get into what your team does, why did you tackle this issue?
There were a lot of reasons. I think that I knew that once we got scholars to school, they were going to love being here because we were going to create a really safe, supportive, and high academic learning environment. But I knew we needed to get them here every day. And so, yeah, we jumped in my first year. Do you want me to share our data, Heidi?
The data is showing. Tell us, what kind of reductions have you gotten?
Yeah, so my first year as principal, our chronic absentee rate was 28%, which we were celebrating because the previous year we were in the 55s with COVID and all of those things happening. And so last year, we really dug into our partner attendance work, and we reduced it to 7% last school year. And currently, as of today, we are sitting at 2% of our scholars chronic, which is 4 scholars in our whole school.
That is amazing. So how did you do that? What worked to make this even possible? And you should see all the claps and celebration of that incredible reduction. You guys went from 55 to 28 to 7 to 2%. I just have to restate that. That is fantastic. So
it is.
How did you do that?
Yeah, my team is amazing. I will first and foremost start there. I think that there are a couple of things. We did many things. So on my slide, you'll see a lot of things break down by quarters.
Next slide, please.
Of how we added a couple of things as the year went on. But there are a couple that I want to highlight because it's a lot of words on there. But there are a couple that I think have just been like our really key pieces to being able to make it happen. So I think the first one is a consistency to the plan. So whatever the plan is going to be, making it in the summer and being super consistent to it. So we decided, and I'm going to go into those of like, what are the pieces that we really focused on, but whatever we started and planned in the summer, we have stuck to. We may have added, like, as you can see, we've kind of flipped a couple things and continued, but we stuck to a plan. I think the second big piece is around retention. So retention of families and retention of staff. That has helped us a lot because that allows the relationships to have more depth. And so our network as a whole really focuses on retention. So making sure that our school culture is consistent, strong, positive, and safe so that scholars want to come to school every day. But also now we had to come up with like, what were the pieces around that? We got them here. Now what are we going to do? So there are, I would say, 3 that I want to highlight. The first one is around daily attendance calls. In the summer, we made a blocked out time for Mrs. Rivera, my secretary, to make those daily attendance calls for anyone that's absent. And it happens at the same time every day. And we try to make sure that she schedules nothing during that time. So at 8:30, we know she's making her calls. Now at this point, it's 3 calls on a crazy day. So those calls, we don't need a big block of time anymore. But the daily attendance calls are really important because families, you want to inspect what you expect. So we expect them to be here. We're going to inspect and make sure they're here and figure out why they're not.
And this was regardless if it was excused, unexcused, if the kid wasn't there, they called?
Yes. So that's a big one. And also, no matter what the code is, like all of them are just as important to us. So it's at the point now where Miss Love, who is on this call, my counselor, they know even if it's absent illness, like that still is accounting across for our absentee rate. So those are also still important to us. The second one is we kind of varied it by quarter, but my counselor still does this and our attendance team jumped in as well after quarter one, but we do lunch buddies. This quarter, it's kind of made itself now to check in and check out, but everyone on my attendance team has a grade band and a specific list of scholars that we're focused on that we check in with every day. So I have the youngest scholars in the school. Some of them have been on my list since quarter two, some of them, and it has varied. But we are really consistent on making sure that we're checking in and checking out with them. A quick hi, hello. We've told families we're doing this, so they know as well. And they will come find me if I am not there to check in with them. And they will ask me where I was. And so it's become a very consistent thing for us.
What's a lunch buddy? And how is that different from check-in?
Yeah, so check in, check out can be at any time throughout the day. See them in the hallway, stop by their classroom. Lunch buddies, I already had lunch duty during this time, certain days. And so I would sit with them at the table in the cafeteria and we would just build a deeper relationship. Sometimes I'd bring random questions I was going to ask them, really random things, funny things, just creating like a sense of experience and meeting them on their level. And my counselor actually has a group that she meets with really consistently as well. And they actually go to her office outside of the cafeteria too. So it just depends, but they love it. And it's been really fun.
Can I ask a quick question, a background one, that when you do you have a high transience in your population?
I don't. We, as of right now, for our returners, we have maybe 5 scholars leaving our school next year. So when they're coming, they're staying. And I think that's really helped a lot.
And then I just want to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll let you finish up, and we'll go on to Jackson. But
yeah,
when you're doing calls, so when you do daily calls, if a student is out for something like flu, they're still getting the call every day until they come back in?
Yes.
And these are in-person, real person calls. They're not like a robocall, correct?
They are, yes.
All right. And what's the kind of messaging they use when they're making the call?
By this point, they're actually calling us. I feel like they're now coming to the point where they're going to call ahead of time, leave a message, send a dojo message, something like that. So I think that's also why our calls are lessening, just because they're communicating. It's like a mutual communication in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I have found that because of high retention of staff, that like where they're saying they're going is what's really happening at this point, most of the time.
All right. So is there anything else when you think about this incredible reduction you've gotten that you think explains it?
I would say this has been the biggest one. I guess I saved the best for last, is 8 o'clock to 8:30. So they're considered tardy at our school at 8 o'clock. And so we tell them 7:59. And from 8 to 8:30, we have a very sacred time in our school of morning meeting. And we have really made that a pillar of our school this year, because we recognize that sometimes if we just jump right into the academic, scholars are not seen. And so we created a space with our 5 components that they do every single day. And because it was so important to me, I actually planned the whole school's morning meeting for Monday and send the deck to them 2 weeks early. And so I plan Mondays. It allows me to track trends and address trends in our school through morning message, activities, the questions I'm asking, all types of things. And then teachers don't even have to think at the weekend about what is my morning meeting on Monday. It's already intentional and it's planned so that I'm modeling for them what I want Tuesday through Friday to look like, but also I'm in the weeds with them and alongside them because I think it's so valuable. So morning meeting is one of my most favorite parts of the day. And I would say that most scholars also don't want to miss school or be tardy because that's what they'll be missing.
All right. I'm going to have Jaden just go back one slide. And before we turn to William, I could see people, we went a little quick. So you have,
I have 231 scholars in a K-8 public charter school, and 94% of my scholars are Latinx.
And in terms of economically, on free and reduced price lunch?
We don't actually track that. It's very different in Tennessee. And so we do, everyone just gets it. So we don't decipher between who does and who doesn't.
Yeah, but it's a lot of, this
it's
is a high poverty.
Yes. I don't know the exact number, but yes, it is.
That's helpful context. Kami, you're going to stay around. We're going to come back and have conversation across the three administrators here who are talking about, but we want to shift over to Jackson. So William, Jackson, Riley, you guys, when I say Jackson, it's still William. I've had the pleasure of meeting, and let's go to the next slides. First of all, I'd love for Jackson just say a little bit about your building, and then let's talk about why you thought you needed to address attendance and how long you've been there.
Absolutely. So I've been working here in Providence for 10 years, 5 years as an administrator, 2.5 as a middle school assistant principal. I was a high school teacher, and then I got the call one day to go be an elementary school principal, which was shocking. After that point in time, in the spring one year, about 2 years into my principalship there, I got called to run both that elementary school and my current middle school, Nathaniel Green, for the rest of the school year, which was a very interesting time in my life. But I've been here at Green now. This is my second full year. This work really excites me. I wrote my dissertation on data-driven instruction. Data-informed decision-making and teacher collaboration. So this is really in my wheelhouse, and I love doing it. When I started here at Nathaniel Green, here in Providence Public Schools, we serve about 20,000 students across 40 schools. Here at Nathaniel Green, we have about 900 students, 69 teachers. Almost a third of our population are multilingual learners. About 20% are special education. 90% receive free and reduced lunch. We have about 15 buses that come every day. Again, there was a lot to sort through when I began here. Most importantly, we were a one-star school, which in the Rhode Island system means that you're in the bottom 1% of all schools in the state. We had 6 subgroups that were identified that were even lower than the 1% in the state, including multilingual learners, different races, special education. 50% of the students were chronically absent. That was the big number to me. And then following that, it was about a third of the teachers were chronically absent. So, it really seemed to me that students and teachers had lost their belonging in the school, and that, a lot of the academic data is probably being affected by both the student and the teacher absences.
Absolutely. So, tell us a little bit about the condition. You have a next slide that just talks about what it was like for you, because you're in your second year. So this next slide, if we go to it, this is what you saw coming in, right?
Yeah, there was 3 different principals in 2 years, about 8 different assistant principals. Again, very low morale. The school had been a very, historical school. It's been here for 100 years. But really during COVID, lots of the things that celebrated joy went away. So it was pretty much just go to class and go home. There was really no systems and structures. Students had classes on every floor. No teachers really shared students. But what was clear to me was there was teachers that were trying their best with really no direction, going in a million different ways, and really good students that just didn't have the structures or supports to really help them grow in their learning or even come to school.
So just to give us a preview,
Hmm.
how much were you able to reduce chronic absence?
We went from 50% to 29% in just a little over a year.
That's amazing. Can we show the next slide? Just so sometimes it's helpful to have a little visual on that.
Yeah, this was, really what the work that we did on. As Hetty just said, I was actually just in San Diego. I was invited by the Raise Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation, where they're building a lot of their attendance plans for California schools on the work that we've been doing. But this is very possible in a very urban school with a very transient population. It just, again, takes a team working around data and supporting students and families the right way.
So tell us a little bit about your team. Who's on your team?
Yeah. Do you want to go to that next slide? That might
Sure.
help. Wonderful. So basically, again, we were looking at this data, seeing the chronic absenteeism, seeing the low performance and academic scores. And the first thing that we said was we have to get the kids in the building. If the kids are not in the building, it doesn't matter how great our teaching is. And it doesn't matter if our teachers aren't in the building and our kids are. We have to get everybody there to make sure that learning is happening. So over the summer, one of my guidance counselors is on here, Lori Dano. She's absolutely incredible. We basically sat down and we looked at the number of students that had missed between about 18 and 35 days. We wanted to target the kids that we still thought were reachable the next school year and that we could really encourage to make sure that they were there for missing less than 18 days of school. So we sat down, myself, 3 assistant principals, 4 guidance counselors. We had a director of school operations. We had a community specialist. We literally brought in pretty much everybody that wasn't student facing all day. And we took this list, which ended up being about 150 to 180 kids, and we divvied them up between the 12 to 15 of us. And we basically said, you're going to be responsible for these 10 kids. You're responsible for these 10 kids. And then those adults scheduled attendance meetings over the summer where they brought families in, had them look at the students' attendance, had them look at the students' grades, and really set goals about where they want their outcomes to be. And making it really clear, look, your students' grades are this. Is this your expectation? And of course, the answer is no. Well, them not coming to school is contributing to this, and it's really going to affect their future opportunities in high school and beyond. Aside from that, we really asked questions about what do you need, right? One of the things that families really needed was food. They weren't able to send their kid to school because of food issues. So we partnered with another organization here in Rhode Island, and we have a full-blown food pantry now with frozen meats, vegetables, cereals, rices, you name it. And every Friday we send a bunch of kids home with food that needed at home. Another thing was busing. In our district, if you live less than 1.5 miles away, you don't get a yellow bus. You have to walk to school. And we had a lot of parents saying, due to the safety and where we live, I don't feel comfortable with them walking. And so if I have to go to work early and I can't drive them, we work with transportation and get them a bus. So it was really a conversation that was grounded in the students' data, but that ultimately ended up in how can we support you as a family to get your student here? Now, throughout the school year, this is again, where I get geeky about the numbers and attendance, especially chronic absenteeism. Every 10 days, a kid can fall off of being chronic. So on day 51, a student with 5 absences is no longer considered chronic. So one thing that we really wanted to make sure of is that the lists of students that we were supporting, the 10 or 12 kids, that list was going to be fluid. For instance, on day 100, a kid that was on my list at the start of the year that's only missed 4 or 5 days, we pretty much graduated them from this program. This program that consisted of a student checking in with their required adult every day. If they didn't check in with their adult, they were getting a phone call home. And if nobody was answering that phone call home, we were sending 2 people on a home visit. And again, my guidance counselor on here will tell you, there's one home, the parents said, I can't get the kid out of bed. She marched right into the bedroom and that kid was mortified, right? But then word spread about how much we care about getting these kids into school and the length that we'll go to. But then again, going back to that kid that's only missed 5 days on day 100, they would graduate and come off our list. And then we'd look at the data
How often
again.
are you looking at that list?
Every
Like,
10 days.
Every 10 days.
Every 10 days. And again, we would want there to be a space of, 4 or 5 days in between. So like, again, at day 100, we were removing kids that had 5 or below, but kept on 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then we started to look at students that had missed 11, 12, and 13, right? Where's our next bunch of kids that we don't want to get to 18 that is still within reach? Bring the families in and pretty much have that same process.
So, Jackson, you've talked about this team of what, 12 folks?
Yep.
But you also have shared with me that you did another thing to create team that has to do with how you structured your school. Can we go to the next slide and you talk a little bit about that strategy?
Yeah, again, this is very far from rocket science. And I know it's done in many schools across the country, but here in Providence, it really wasn't. Like I had said, students had classes all across the building. Teachers, didn't share any students. And, knowing that budget cuts were coming and we weren't going to have all of these 12 people the next year, we're down to about 7 or 8 now. We really had to have conversations about how could we mobilize our teaching team to support with the attendance efforts we were doing. How can we also make the building safer? How can we also bring more joy in that sense of belonging, not just from the students, but also from the teachers? And so one thing that we really focused on was the teaming process. So here at Green, we have 3 teams in each grade level. A team consists of a math, science, social studies, and ELA teacher. And our students travel in pods of 26, almost like elementary. The same 26 kids are together all day. They move from class to class together. Their teachers walk them from class to class. The teachers' rooms are right next to each other. So one team would be 101, 102, 103, and 104. And then the real key to this is that all of those teachers have the same prep period. And so once a week, we meet on their prep period with the assistant principal, the guidance counselor, and the instructional coach. And then this is really the time for us to talk through any student issues or anything that's going on. And, we might bring up, hey, Hetty's missed, a bunch of days this week. We've been trying to get in touch with her. We did a home visit that was unsuccessful. Who's got a good relationship with the family? And, 9 out of 10 times, one of the teachers that's been here for, 20 or 30 years, because it's that kind of a building, will raise their hand and they'll be like, I had 4 of their siblings. I know their mother so well. Let me reach out to their mom. I will take care of it. But again, it creates that sense of belonging and these teachers actually working together to support the whole student. What I really want to share is that through all of these attendance efforts and through cutting the chronic absenteeism in half, we went from being a school identified for comprehensive improvement that was 1 star to a 2-star school and the highest performing ever ELA proficiency on our state assessment. We also went down to 0 identified subgroups. So all of our subgroups in our school were performing higher than 1-star schools. And we had an 82% of our students score in typical or high growth on ELA star, which was in the top 2% in the country. So I can't link it all to attendance, but what I can promise you is that if our kids were not coming to school at the rate they were, we would not have made such academic gains and really provided change in these kids' lives. So I'm very happy for attendance and very happy to be here to share all of this with you today.
Amazing. What an inspirational story. All right. Jackson is not going to go away. We're going to still have a cross-cutting panel, but we want to turn to Jeremy. And let's go to the next slide. So, and bring in Jeremy, talking about Euclid schools over in Ohio. So you can see a little bit about the background and who all is in Euclid schools. Jeremy, do you want to say anything more about that? And then tell us, most importantly, what is your position in Euclid schools and how long you've been working in that role?
Yeah, first and foremost, I just want to, thank you all for this great opportunity. I'm the attendance and the residency coordinator here in Euclid. I've been here 7 years this past December. And what's really, caused me to, tackle chronic absenteeism is, 1, it's a primary role of my job, but 2, a close second is, I sit on a couple different committees in our district, that all depend on attendance from, our graduation team, which is compiled of a number of different representatives from central office and, in our high school, and even teachers and staff from our middle school. So it's just, as it's been forestated a few different times, a few different ways, if our kids aren't in their seats, they're quite frankly not being educated. So it's really the foundation to education as a whole.
So Jeremy, who's on your team at a district level? How does that operate?
So as a district level, one of our community partners, the Stay in the Game Network, really, is phenomenal in the way of increasing awareness and encouraging you and putting different ways together to improve attendance, decrease chronic absenteeism. So part of my team that I lead consists of two representatives from each building in our district for a total of 8 buildings, one being an administrator and one other, staff member that has a little bit more flexibility as it pertains to their day, so they can make our meetings. We have our core team meetings the first Tuesday of every month, where we sit there and analyze data from chronic absenteeism, any student that has missed consecutive days. So the important piece about that is, to have people understand and know the data, because then they can go back to their BLTs, their building leadership teams, and discuss, specific kids, what's causing these, absences, what barriers need to be removed, stuff like that. So that has been working for us. That hasn't always been the case. But since the year of 21-22, where we had 57% chronic absenteeism rate, had a decrease of 9.6% the following year of 22-23. 23-24 decreased by 2.5% down to 44.9, and currently right now we're at 42. So those are alarming numbers. We are nowhere near where we want to be, but thank goodness for us, we're not where we used to be.
And we all have to start someplace. And when you
Absolutely.
have really high levels of chronic absence, and I think at a district level, what we see is changes even slower than at a school level, because you're trying to talk about herding cats and trying to get people to all move together. So one, kudos on the decreases, recognizing you still have more to go. What have been your most effective strategies, Jeremy? And let's go to the next slide.
Well, I'll say this before, as the first couple bullet points. Again, I have to shout out not only my team in our district, but we really had to take a look back, from a systematic standpoint, and really restructure some things from the central office all the way down. And part of which helped us was the Proving Ground team. They've been phenomenal. I just don't say that. I never forgot our first meeting with them, where it was addition by subtraction. And so, as we know, most school districts, at least, are often guilty of so many different initiatives, to the point where you're like, I'm decent at this one and I'm going to do this one, but you really never become really good at one. And so they, really helped us hone in on what are some of the root causes of causing the absences. And so,
And Jeremy, let me just so people know what Proving Grounds is. Proving Grounds is out of Harvard. They
yes,
bring together districts in a community of practice, correct? So they have a number of teams, and in Ohio, you have a set of districts who are part of this, and then they take your data, right? They
yes.
use your data, help you analyze your data, and then they help you meet over time to unpack what's happening around attendance, correct?
Correct. And then they also, within that, they help you create a customized intervention based off of what you found through the data. So, for instance, one of our initial interventions, where we felt like we needed to build from the ground up. So we did personalized attendance nudges with grades K through 2, um, 2 years ago, because we found an alarming rate in our kindergarten, first and second grades of chronic absenteeism, which for us, I don't know about anyone else, but it was very surprising. So what we did was, over the summer, as it was mentioned by Jackson, is we identified students who were chronically absent to the prior year. And then we were very intentional about creating personalized attendance nudges to send to the families, to let them know, hey, this is the amount of days that you missed. What caused those absences? What can we do to help? Which obviously goes back to building a relationship with the family. And then going into the school year on a good note. And what we were very strategic about in this instance is we had our family liaisons, which are licensed social workers in each of our buildings, reach out, because they most times had good rapport already established with the families. So it just wasn't someone from central office saying that, because again, they wouldn't know us from the next man on the street, right? And so it just made intervention a bit easier. And so that definitely helped contribute to, decreasing those numbers that I mentioned earlier.
And what you have another intervention called you, because folks are actually wondering also about high school strategies, and our prior principles were at the elementary and middle level. What
Correct.
have you done at the high school level that has been effective?
Well, that's our main focus. We definitely aren't where we want to be there. But as far as one thing that we recognize with the help of Proving Ground is we recognize we had a ton of class cuts. I mean, it was off the charts. So during the 23-24 school year, we had over 10,000 process referrals for class cuts. And so the reason that's important, and in the state of Ohio, attendance is tracked by the hour, not the day. So I know that is different from other states. It can cause a few more headaches at times, but so when kids were missing, fourth, fifth, and sixth period, which we found was our biggest time of class cuts, we were trying to figure out why. Well, it was because it was a lunch period, and a lunch period was basically at this time come one, come all. It was very hard to decipher who was supposed to be in lunch and who was not. So one of the things that we did is we piloted at the end of the 23-24 school year with the help of our IT team, was in order to get in lunch, you now had to scan or type your number in. So now when kids got wind of that, we saw, less cuts. And of course, there would be, few that would still try to, press their way. But with that, now we were getting kids back in class. And then, so to put that on a number standpoint, for the end of 23-24, we had over 10,000 process referrals for class cut / truancy. And as of right now, for this school year, we have 1,064. So when you're tracking it by the hour and you're, a teacher's having to mark you absent for a period or two, what happens is now all that little bit helps, because again, when you track it by the hour, then it can accumulate to, those thresholds that we are held to here in Ohio.
So what I see, you all took your data and said, all these kids are basically skipping some academic class and showing up at the lunchroom so they can go hang out with their other friends, right? So
Absolutely.
you
So
then use that to change that so kids knew you would notice. And then if you notice, are you actually escorting them back to class if they show up and they're saying you're like, no, that's not like your lunch period.
yeah, absolutely. So again, this is why this is all about collaboration. So we have a representative from our security team that will escort them back to class. But understand that that initial number was probably pretty big, but now it's because it is a standard now and it's the norm. It's not nearly as huge as it used to be. But the biggest thing about this and what helped us from Proving Ground is being intentional about the data. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, we have all these cuts and 10,000, but it's another thing to be intentional about what you're trying to do to change it. And so what that showed us and confirmed for us is, again, even though our numbers aren't drastically cut just yet, but when you're intentional about what you're trying to improve and it becomes, and you operate in fidelity, it can help you establish those standards and policies. And then now you're inching towards those outcomes that we all desire.
One other question. Have you had any need to address the issue of kids in high school feeling apathetic, feeling like school isn't a place that they want to be?
We have that's been a major challenge for our high school, especially since COVID. Obviously that aligning with mental health, and so we've had kids that prefer to be virtual or part of our hybrid program, which is called Panther Academy. So it's has a in-person requirement, but it's not the traditional form. And so that's an ongoing issue for us. We've partnered with outside mental health agencies these really the last 5 years, but right now we're leaning on them heavily, because once we recognize some of these attendance issues and we're doing what we call our Panther engagement plans, a lot of it is formulating about mental health and feeling overwhelmed, and safety has come up a lot, in some of these conversations with our students and or families.
Okay, I'd love for you to just tell us briefly about the attendance calendars and the monthly check-ins with administrators, and then we're going to actually bring everyone back together for some cross-cutting conversation.
Sure. So our attendance calendars, and I specifically put K through 5, that's been a huge for us. I think it was mentioned earlier. So we do morning meetings here as well. So what we actually implemented during a gallery walk in our district leadership meeting last year, we recognized that one of our elementary schools had a tremendous decrease in chronic absenteeism. So we were like, hey, what are some of the things that you're doing? And one of it was something as simple as every morning they had their young scholars coloring. If it was green and I'm on time ready to learn, they were coloring that day green. If I was there but late, they were coloring that day yellow. And of course, if I missed a day, that was red. And so obviously that was something that they can speak to during conferences. Obviously, they were sending those home just so the parents could see, because what I've read and been told through my professional learning communities when I'm doing training is it's something about we as parents. If our kid has missed 4 days, in our mind, if they've missed 4 days, it's really closer to about 8. It's usually a doubled number. So when you can have that visual, that usually will help, things. And the last but certainly not least, something that I'm doing with our administrators right now with our monthly check-ins, which has been huge. This is actually the first year I've done it. So I'm meeting with building principals and their attendance intervention teams one day, the same day, every month, same time, within reason. And what we're doing is I have all the data compiled and section off for their building, so we can actually be intimate in talking about their building, their challenges, what their supports are, talking about their chronic absenteeism by quarter. I break it down by grade level to see if there's any specific grade level that's thriving, and see if there's any specific grade level that sticks out that might have some challenges. And one example that I'll give is one of our elementary schools whose chronic absenteeism right now is 21%. So it's the lowest out of all of our buildings. One thing that we found is their second grade teachers had the lowest. It was like 15% for their students, but there was a direct correlation with their staff attendance. They also had the lowest absences in a staff for their staff in the second grade. So there is a direct correlation, as Jackson mentioned, I believe, that we want our teachers and need our teachers to be in their place, because it's a form of accountability. It's a form of just, your overall culture and climate of your building, when you can say your staff, are on time and ready to educate their scholars.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to the, actually, can you invite all of our administrators to be back? And let's go to the next slide. So, I wanted to, if we could have all of our principals here and all of us on the screen, that would be fabulous. So you were just where you landed, Jeremy, about making sure your school staff are all aware of this and involved in this. How do you guys equip, engage, make part of your school staff as part of all of this? And I'm going to actually start with maybe Jackson, and there was a question in the chat that was also about, so did your teacher absenteeism decrease along with your student absenteeism? So answer that question and then talk about how you're engaging your staff in this.
Yes, it dropped to 6%, which was fantastic. That's about 2 or 3 teachers in the building. So to go from 30 to that made a huge difference as well. I think in terms of this question, again, the teaming was just such a huge thing for us, because it really allotted the time for an administrator and a guidance counselor to talk to the teachers about attendance issues that we were having, and also give them the time to support with phone calls or anything else that we had. So, we have a system here that, it literally shows us every single absent student has, if they're on track to be chronic or not, which is extremely helpful. But we would print that right out for the teachers by team, and then they would just see the students on their team that, were either approaching chronic or were chronic, and then we would all talk about the solutions that we needed. So again, this was a really all hands on deck issue, but the teachers felt buy-in because of the teaming and the sense of belonging that they had to the 3 other teachers and the 104 students they work with.
Amy, how did you get your staff on board?
I think we presented a lot and talked about it in the summer. And that was really helpful to set the foundation. We talk about it every day on the announcements, something they hear a lot about, and it's a repeated messaging of celebrating what's happening and what's going well. And then I actually just started adding some of this data to my weekly morning meeting decks on Mondays. So that way the school is seeing how each other is doing as well, and to be able to celebrate it.
Well, and I wonder, Kami, if by doing the weekly morning meetings, because the teachers each have to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's also another strategy for engagement. You're
Yep.
equipping them to know how to do things that make kids want to show up. Jeremy, what would you add to what you've seen helps administrators or you as a district have needed to do to help make sure that staff are aware and you have a system of support that involves your staff?
You know what? It's as simple as this is just my second year, and I've been here 7 years, but this is my second year being a part of the district leadership team. So believe it or not, I really wasn't a part of that. I would create, and share the data, but now I'm actually in front of our district, our DLT, presenting the data, answering questions, and now that trickles down to the BLT, our building leadership teams. And so between that, our standing game meetings, and again, as I mentioned, I have representatives from each school. So now they're also known as our school captains. So they'll go back to the schools, communicating, the very things that we, communicate during that meeting, and just attendance memos, making sure that, sharing that information quarterly with administrators. They have direct access to it, but then I'll also send it out as well. So it just being more intentional about it, and making sure, you eliminate all assumptions and share that information.
So are the folks in charge of academics part of this? Because if you're going to principals, I mean, what we've seen is unless the person who oversees principals is part of this, it's sometimes hard to get the attention of all of your building administrators. You always get a few, but
Yeah.
to actually have a systemic approach, academics often can be a key partner.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is probably the closest and the most consistent I've been working with our director of curriculum, Becky Mamage. Her and I have been partnering together a lot more these last 2 years, and she's the one that really handles the DLT. And so we meet monthly, we design, and make sure, our presentations are, specific, intentional, that type of stuff. So absolutely, that plays a huge role in that.
And I'm going to lobby something over to Jackson. What about the union? How do you get the union involved in this? Because that can be a barrier.
Yeah, so very interesting building. I had both the president of the Providence Teachers Union as well as the secretary of the Providence Teachers Union that were in my building for 30 plus years. Strategically, when I started here, they were at the table for every conversation. When we talked about walking kids to class, I'll never forget, there was one teacher that made a comment and Miss Calabro just crossed her arms and looked at her and said, "Hey, it's not a lobotomy. You can figure it out." But because they were at the table and they wanted to see this school succeed after being here for so many years, as soon as we got their buy-in, we got everybody else's buy-in. Because we did make a lot of changes in 2 years, but they were collaborative changes based around the data that not only I wanted, that really good teachers wanted, and they made sure to hold each other accountable. So that was a huge leadership move that I definitely recommend. Get your building rep if you have one on your team. Just have them have a seat at the table. Half the time, they don't even care what the outcome is, but they just want to feel respected and feel like they're part of the conversation.
Absolutely. So I want to go to the next question, and folks have been asking this. First of all, I want to remind people you can put questions in the chat. But if we go to the next slide, but folks are asking a question that we had already anticipated. And the question, if you go to the next slide, is how are health and behavioral health involved in your work? And as part of that, our school nurses part of this. How do we, we're post-pandemic, health has always been an issue, but it's even more of an issue. Kami, you want to give us,
Sure.
start us off?
Yeah, so we're because of some of our scholar needs, this isn't a normal thing at our school, but we have a daily nurse this year. But in the past, it's been 1 day a week. So that has been a blessing to have. And it's been based around just some scholars that we have in our building, the need that they have. But we have a really amazing director of student services. And she is really influential and helpful around connecting us with a lot of community partners that have been really helpful for us to connect our families to in different ways based off of needs. And so between me, the director of student services, and the counselor, we've been able to really support families based off of the needs that they have. So yes, nurses here, we're blessed for a daily one, but that's not always a common occurrence here in Memphis.
Jackson, Jeremy, either one of you?
Sure. This is an opportunity for us to improve on, but we have some great things in the works. We actually now have our own wellness clinic. It's been in existence these past 2 years. But where we need to improve, actually, I just talked about this in our standing game core meeting, is that now we need to increase the awareness about our wellness clinic. And so it makes sense to me going into the 25-26 years. So if a kid is sent home because they're sick, that should be a direct referral to our wellness clinic, which might expedite them getting back in school, because they're being seen by our nurses in that capacity. It's increasing the traffic there, which obviously is a good thing when it comes to justifying having a wellness clinic. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, we have some partnerships with a couple of organizations out here, Belfair, Ohio Guidestone, when it comes to the mental health piece. So it's definitely a pivotal part, but we definitely have to improve and increase the awareness of our families.
And, I'll just say we are so incredibly thankful for school nurses. They go above and beyond for our kids every day. One thing that our school nurse has been incredible at that's really helped our attendance is that she runs many vaccination clinics throughout the school year. So otherwise, the students would be medically exempt and they would not be allowed to come to school, affecting their attendance. But she makes sure to track all of that. And, she'll get 50 to 70 kids every time she runs one, but it really ensures that, again, students are healthy, they're in school, and they're not exempt from being here.
All right. I'm gonna ask Jaden to take off the slides. I'll ask my other question, and then we'll also go to any other ones in the chat. So one question is, so are there other key community partners that have really been involved and supportive beyond the health, behavioral health supports that you guys have all talked about?
So for me, it's definitely the Pepito Foundation here in Rhode Island. They're the ones that stock our food pantry every week. Like I said, they come with full frozen meats, all different kinds of cereals, pancake mix, you name it. But that was one of our number one things when we had our meetings with parents. It was, we really need support with getting food. And I'm really happy to say that, through that organization, supporting us with the Department of Education, it's made a huge difference in student attendance and also really providing supports that public schools should for families.
We have two that come to mind, and one I just thought of, Jackson, after hearing you talk, but one of the pillars in our network is service learning. And so we partner with all different community partners that have been really helpful to also support our scholars personally. And so quarterly, they're doing all different types of service learning, and it has been really helpful to connect us to different pieces around the community. And then the second one is we work alongside the United Way in a lot of ways, and they connect us and outsource us to other pieces as well, so that we support scholars with individual counseling, family counseling, all different types of things, so that scholars are getting what they need.
For our district outside of the mental health, for our Family Resource Center, which I may have failed to mention, that's also helped us develop, a stronger rapport with our families. But local stores, grocery stores, Dave's grocery store, Trader Joe's, they donate and keep our FRC stocked when it comes to like the food. So that's huge. And then again, Stay in the Game is huge. Again, Stay in the Game.
And so, yeah, let's say a little bit more about who Stay in the Game is and who's involved. I don't think folks know what that is.
Yeah, so Stay in the Game is a phenomenal network, which also I think it's under Battelle as well. But
Well, it's
you know,
got started from the Cleveland Browns. That's the part I want to make sure people knew.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. So the Cleveland Browns Foundation plays an integral role. Does a lot of people ask, does help fix attendance? It doesn't necessarily fix attendance, but it does create help increase awareness and engagement. They provide you with many marketing tools, quote unquote, obviously Stay in the Game being the main focus. Um, they create incentives for schools and or students individually who have not just perfect attendance or good, but big on improved attendance, because then when you have improved attendance and you can, hey, recognize a family, not just a kid but sometimes a family, that will motivate them to do even better. We've done, man, there's been so many things, not just football related. They've given donated tickets for like the Nutcracker, so allowing our families to maybe partake in some events that they might have never had an opportunity to experience. And so that's been huge for us. And so they've been an excellent help for us. And so I would recommend anyone. I know, I'm not sure if it's closed, but I know they right now are taking, we're taking applications to try to become a partner. So if you're in Ohio, look into partnering with them because they do an amazing job.
Jeremy, I wanted to comment two things. One, because I saw a comment about what about like California? So, first of all, part of what happens with Stay in the Game is it's the Browns and in Cleveland. And
Yes,
oh my
Cleveland. Yep.
God, Cleveland loves the Browns. So I'm
Absolutely.
not sure that if you took Cleveland to California, just want to say, not sure the Browns is going to go over. There's a handful of people, but you might need to. And there are conversations people can have with their own sports team. And one of the things I remember, so Jeremy, one of the folks involved in Attendance Works is Lori Hobson, who was at the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and she talked about how they were having a problem with tardies. And the Cleveland Browns players came into the classrooms and started telling the kids about how important it was to show up and how if they didn't got to a practice late or missed it, they got fined. And like that, having a Browns player that you kind of look up to. So there
Yes.
is something about using your as a community partner,
Mhm.
athletes and other folks who are respected by the community to send the messages.
Listen, we've had phenomenal opportunities. So they'll come here. It's amazing. The players are great, but I'm gonna tell you right now, from whether it's K through 12, Chomps is the star. Chomp shows up, everyone goes nuts. That's the Cleveland Browns mascot for those that aren't fans. But yeah, that we've got, even if they can't come in person, we can send automated messages, for like spring slump or winter break, like, hey, back to school batches. So they do an amazing job. It's almost like unlimited resources. They're very, creative in how they can support districts. So, kudos to Stay in the Game.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple other questions from folks. How do you handle students who fly under the radar? Their grades are good, but their attendance is poor. Anyone?
That's, in my opinion, that's where those reports are huge. Analyzing that, we have like consecutive absence reports or chronic absenteeism reports, because those allow you to really hone in on specific names. I think that's, again, as you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, that average daily attendance rate is great. But if you really want to focus on those students that aren't attending, really hone in on those reports that'll pull your chronic absenteeism. So being intentional about that on a daily and weekly basis, in my opinion.
I think that question is also asking about how do you convince the family that's an issue. And I think about this connected to Learning Heroes, where they had actually done analysis and found out that during the pandemic, kids were not showing up much to school, and their test scores showed they were actually not learning as much, but they were all getting B's. So their family thought, oh, that my kid's fine. So how, and I let me ask both Jackson and Kami, have you seen this, and how do you get to that kid to help them and their family know why should they keep showing up or show up more?
So, I'll give you two things here. So, one big thing that we started doing last year was, we brought in a lot of school events, whether that's dances or fall festivals or spring fest, like lots of the things that kids liked. And it was a requirement that you couldn't have a suspension to do it originally. We brought chronic absenteeism into it. So for that kiddo, like you're saying, that has the great grades, if they want to go to the school dance, if they want to go to the fall fest, they also need to be coming to school every day. So that was a big thing. And then, in our district, we have lots of high schools that you have to test into. So you have to put in an application, their school choice, and we make very clear to the families, not only are they looking at the state assessment scores and your students' grades, they're also looking at your students' chronic absenteeism. So depending on what school that your student wants to attend, that's going to play a huge game in it, especially if they're academically doing very well.
I agree. I think it's that celebration piece and really shedding a light on the chronic part and creating vocabulary so families know what that is. Because I think sometimes they'll say, well, I called. Why is this day still counting? I called to tell them I wasn't going to be here. And so it's like changing the narrative of like what chronic and daily and truancy and all those things mean. But also I think like that's a huge staff follow-up to have on as well, like around like truthfulness of grades and like weights. And there's like so much that's involved in that. And so I think like that's another piece that's really important for not only just families, but for staff as well, is to making sure that like what they're actually getting is actually where they are. And really seeking, going back again, no matter good grades, not good grades, all of those things, like what is the why? Like why, okay, you're getting good grades, so you're able to access the content. So why aren't you coming to school? And really seeking the why, because there is a reason. And so really trying to figure out what that reason is.
So there's also some questions about, so how do you really then get families involved? Are there particular, they feel like they can get the kids, but not the parents. How do you build and grow those connections to the families?
I mean, I'll say one thing. When we held those meetings over the summer and really had families in and showed them the impact of attendance on students' grades, and then brought in the fact about, again, applying to high schools and future opportunities, it's kind of, that was a light bulb moment of, okay, now I can actually see a correlation between the fact that my kid's not going to school, and their grades aren't where they need to be. Another point that I think I heard Jeremy bring up is, here in Rhode Island, if you miss 3 or more periods in a 6-period school day, you're absent. So, the parent would say, well, I sent my kid to school. What do you mean they were absent? Well, if they skipped 3 classes, that counts as an absence, even though they're in the building all day. And, we've done a lot of work on that, trying to figure out, how do we correct that? Because if the kid is physically here, we need to make sure that they're in class. And again, the teaming approach that we did with walking the students class to class has really cut down on that as well.
I think a big one, and I actually just did this last Monday. So our big focus for Q4, everyone's getting tired, is tardies. And so we've started to send home tardy reminders, how many did your scholar have, all of those things. But I actually brought families in who had 10 or more tardies, and having younger elementary kids at home as well really allowed me to be able to not only just be the administrator and principal, but also like I'm a parent with you in this scenario. And so I had them experience a morning meeting, and I led one for families. And so I allowed them to see like bringing them into the space is really important, because it gives them what they think it is, and what it actually is probably doesn't match. And
Can
so
you just say a moment about what is in a morning meeting and like
Oh, yeah. So it has 5 components. It's a greeting where I think Mondays I had them do an elbow bump, greet the person by name. So they're practicing that, like looking at someone in the eye and greeting them. Hello, William, how are you doing today? They do a share, usually a random, sometimes silly question, sometimes serious question about like, who is someone you really look up to and why, and the class is sharing it together. They do a check-in, which I think is probably the most important part of morning meeting, asking them how they're doing. And usually it's some silly little image of, well, this week it was of a random cat with all these different cat faces. And the middle schoolers thought it was hilarious about how they're really feeling that day. You get a morning message, like a letter, where you're modeling to scholars how to write well, but also what's really important about what's happening in the class or the school. And then you do an activity together. So silence.
And so when you had your families see that, what
Mhm.
happened?
I just told them, if they are here after 8, this is what they're missing. And some of the families were like, oh, so they're missing like getting to talk with their friends. Like they're missing like playing, having shared experiences together. I was like, that's what they're missing. So when you're moving slow in the morning and your kid's like, Mom, I really want to be at school, this is what's happening. So I think like as an administrator, when I start to see things like that happen, I'm thinking about how do I bring people in to share in the experience so that they understand like what's really happening. Because all of us have even school when we were growing up till now is so different. So like having them experience what's happening is really important.
Okay, how do you get teachers to show up more to school? This is a question. How do you improve the chronic absences among the educators themselves?
Well, I'll say this really quick. What one of our particular schools, and it'll be district wide next year for sure, has been doing is recognizing, teacher attendance. I actually just got pictures and an email today from our elementary school, Chardon Hills, and they track that to a T. And they'll get a standing game shirt, a certificate, and which says perfect attendance award. And so it's become a big thing at Chardon Hills. And so that's another thing that we're going to adopt district wide, just because it's not only fifth and sixth graders like being recognized, we as adults do as well. And most adults in some way, shape, or form are competitive. So if Miss Johnson down there isn't missing days and her kids are thriving, boom, it's a competition, and I see her picture on the bulletin board in the hallway for perfect attendance, I don't want to be exposed for not as well. So that's been big for us, acknowledging perfect attendance, not only, or good attendance, improved attendance, not only with kids, but with staff.
William, what do you think made the biggest difference?
I think we talk a lot about making school joyful for kids, but we also have to think about educators. I'll be totally honest, there's nobody knocking down the doors to teach in schools like there used to be. So we do tons of stuff with the faculty. We have a monthly potluck that one of our teachers organizes, where every month a different department runs that. There's monthly faculty outings. We celebrate them for student of the month, just like we do our kids. But most importantly, I think it's making them feel like they're part of the decision process. Nobody wants to work at a school that they don't like, just like no kid wants to be in a classroom that they don't like. And so, it's how do you get their voice and their buy-in to, again, make a high functioning school, but also incorporate their ideas into different things that you're doing.
All right, one last question. And I know that from Privacy that it's mostly going to be Cami responding. The question is, have you had any concerns about immigration and ICE raids, and is addressing your attendance? And if so, how are you addressing it? Jeremy, and just quickly, I believe Jackson and Jeremy, this has not come up as an issue in your schools.
Correct.
But Kami, it has in yours.
Yes, there have been some specific days this year that have been probably some of my hardest I've had in education, if I'm being honest. I actually had our secretary look it up. So I know like daily average attendance is like, we're here to talk about chronic absenteeism, but just to give a wide picture, like our average daily attendance at our school is 97 to 98% most days. And so there were some days, the end of January, where we dropped to in the 50s with threats and rumors of very large ICE raids. And then again on February 3rd, we dropped down in the 70s. And so it is, it's very real. It continues to be very real, but I also think that it goes back to those relationships is really important. So, yeah, I think that messaging is really important, that being proactive with a plan and making sure families know that you have a plan is really important. And then our network did a great job of setting up like if that does happen at the school, a really clear step-by-step progression. I'm looking at it. I have it hanging in my office backwards, and everyone that would be a part of that plan knows where the paper is and just like following that directive to a T. So listening, being proactive, and yeah, it is real. And those days in January among many were really hard.
And Kami, I just want to point out, even with that, your chronic absence rate is at 2%.
Yes,
They may be affecting a couple days when families
Yeah.
are worried, but because families trust your school so much, for all the other days they feel like they can go to school, they're showing up to school.
They are.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have a chronic absence rate of 2%.
Yes, you should have seen me that night. Whenever I saw our chronic absentee rate double overnight, I was like, but we rode the wave and like continued to listen and continue to support. And yeah, so we're still rolling, but yes, there are days just like all of us have. Absolutely.
I'm going to ask Kwesi to come back. You all have been so amazing. Such appreciation. Kwesi, final thoughts, reflections as we close this out.
Well, first, really congratulations on jobs well done. I mean, I think at the very least, this has all been a reminder of how much leadership matters. And you guys have demonstrated leadership at your building level, at your community level in Euclid, certainly at the kind of district level. And you've created systems and structures. You know, I love the idea that you put forth, Jackson, about how can we bring more joy into the building for students and teachers. And I think that seems like such an almost ridiculous question, right? And yet it's the lack of joy, right? That, nobody wants to be in a place. There's already a lot of stress. In a middle school with 900 kids, there's built-in stress. So you need joy. You need things that hook folks. You need teachers to feel like they have a sense of togetherness. I think the thing that you did by analyzing the data, by coming up with a game plan, by involving people in the game plan and then implementing that plan together is the kind of thing people want to feel like they're part of the solution. And I think that often gets lost in districts that even have a big priority around chronic absenteeism, but they don't have the structures and the mechanisms where people feel a part of the solution. So we've had those on full display today, and then other folks you gotta find your sports team to come in to your town. If you have some folks are luckier than others and have a lot of active sports teams, so we can't guarantee that you'll have that as part of the solution, but it's also a reminder. Last thing I'll say is, and then we can put the slides back up. It's a reminder that you've got to use any and everything you have as a resource. And some folks just happen to be in settings where they have more resources and more access than others. And you can't change that condition, but you've got to use some creativity and instill joy. And so that's what I take away most from that is that word joy. It's not a very joyful time for a lot of folks. And so we've got to work hard at bringing joy back in, injecting joy back into the systems, into ourselves, and piggybacking off of other folks' joy in those moments where we lack joy ourselves. So key resources we're going to share. Everybody will get a copy or a link to the webinar, to the slides, to all of that. We answered as many questions as we could in real time. Thanks, Teddy, for that. We want to promote the campaign here today, ready for tomorrow. Join the campaign, sign up for regular updates, etc. Let's keep going. Next slide. Toolkit. Hetty, I think you're better suited to talk about the toolkit, actually.
I'll do this real quick. We have a toolkit. It's going to be every year we update it and add more. Let's keep going to the next slide. We also have all sorts of social media, other resources. You can see our brand new badges. Yay, exciting. Next slide. And we also will be reissuing resources so you can get your communities to proclaim chronic absence as something that is important in your own community. Next slide. And there are other resources like our Showing Up Matters for Real toolkit. Next slide. And our handout on anxiety. Next slide. These are just, and I'm going to take it back to you, Kwesi.
And yes, please, we hope to see all of you in Minneapolis in a couple of weeks at the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference. We'll have folks from Attendance Works there in a variety of fashions, pre-cons, workshops, etc. And just about the whole country is dealing with this issue in some way, shape, or form. So lots of ideas, lots of creativity will be at the conference. So please register. It's not too late. Jaden?
Next slide. Yep, we got recording, and we also need to make sure folks know that if you could give us feedback through your evaluation. Next slide. So please fill out the evaluation if you can. And then a last one is a thank you to our philanthropic partners, particularly Heising Simons, Overdeck, and then all the individual donors, because in order for us to do this and make it free for everyone, we really need your support. So if you can also continue to support us so we can support you, we would definitely appreciate it.
For sure. I think that's it.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kwesi.